really appreciate all of you to join this session. I hope you could have a wonderful time. Please give a big hand at first to the chair, Cho Park, the president of the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies.
안녕하십니까. Good morning and welcome to the Global HR Forum 2008. I'm very pleased to preside the session today, and I extend my sincere appreciation to all of you for your attendance at this session. My name is Chol Park and I am the president of Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. At this session, we are going to have a discussion on role of the public sector in establishing global communication skills. As the president of a university which specializes in 45 language education, I think that this is a topic we all should take into consideration to prepare our young talents for the rapidly globalized world. I hope that this session provides you with an opportunity to share constructive opinion on foreign language education for fostering human resources equipped with a good language command and global competitiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce you the session speakers and panelists. First, Dr. David Marsh, Dr. David Marsh, Academic Project Director of Continuing Education Center at University of Jyväskylä, Finland. Second, Mr. Mark Howard, Director of English Language Service at British Council, Korea. And third, Dr. Chang-Yong Yang, Dr. Chang-Yong Yang is a professor of English education at Jeju National University. He will make a presentation, or three speakers will make a presentation on today's topic. And as a panelist, Dr. Byung-Min Lee. He is a professor of Department of English Language Education at Seoul National University. And Dr. Sung-Woong Kim. He is a professor of economics at University of Wisconsin. Dr. Byung-Min Lee and Dr. Sung-Woong Kim will participate in the session as panelists. Today's session will be organized with three presentations. Each presentation lasts about 15 or within 20 minutes, respectively, and after discussion and panels and the Q&A time between each presentation. The first presentation is made by Dr. David Marsh. I will present a little Dr. Marsh. Dr. Marsh is an esteemed scholar in his field of multilingualism and bilingual education, and has been heading various research activities and development plan of European Commissions and the European Union. He has extensive experience of teacher development, capacity building, research, and consultancy in a range of different countries in Africa, Europe, and Asia. Today, Dr. Marsh will present us of the current international situation where English is assumed as an exclusive medium of communication, and how young people can effectively prepare themselves for the global market. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Marsh.
Sorry, I'm a little bit tall for this microphone. Right. A very good morning to you. Thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to work with you this morning on something of increasing significance and importance in our lives. I have here a very short presentation. It's split into two parts. Firstly, I want to talk a little bit about the wider situation, the macro situation, and then I want to talk about 7 key drivers for change. Change when we think of the subject today, which is the role of the public sector in establishing global communication skills. I'll just try to. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're living in an age which is marked by convergence. Convergence in technologies, convergence in economics, convergence in politics. And convergence drives what we call integration. And integration is being driven globally by the English language. So when we're out there driving on the global information and increasingly interactive superhighways, we require English. Convergence and English language are increasingly crucial in different educational systems. We have a demand for English which has never been seen before, and we have public sectors which have a duty to ensure that money doesn't buy English in our societies, because we need a broad competence of English right across the societies. Now, convergence means new working models in our lives, and the advanced societies, such as Korea, such as Finland, which is where I'm based at the moment, and others, of course, are focusing very heavily on what is called creative conceptual expansion. And this is directly linked to the teaching and learning of English as a second language, for reasons which I'll explain in a moment. The next point is that even though these things are happening in our lives, educational systems tend to be very slow to react to the needs of modern societies. We can try to forget the financial crisis going on at the moment. In fact, whilst we're at this conference, it might be a good idea to forget that. But we are living in a very fast-moving world, and education systems in the public sector tend to be the tortoise rather than the tiger when it comes to adapting to change. And the next point is that really, if you look at the amount of time and money which is put into English language education in some countries, the outcomes are really quite poor when it comes to young people having sufficient English in their hands so that they can get out there and use it. If we look at the top performing countries in PISA, P-I-S-A, we will see that there's a direct link between how much money is put into English language education for the benefit of all. And there are some very successful stories out there about English, which I know will be taken up in the other presentations. Now, to summarize this first part, the world is interconnected in ways we've never seen before. There is a new global socio-economic order, and there is a new global linguistic order. Globalization and Englishization, which I don't think you can use as a word, but never mind, we'll create it, are absolutely reshaping the educational landscape. English is essential for global collaboration, and creativity through collaboration is now a global necessity and a national necessity in many educational systems. Okay, let's move on to the second part of the presentation, where we look at the 7 drivers. There are 7 drivers which are very interesting if we are to give a broad range of young people, not just the so-called gifted, but a broad range, the skills to develop their English language so that they can be part of this global community. And the first one relates to the new technologies. And this comes from educational psychology. And it's something which is under very, very intense discussion in societies where, one, broadband access is widely available. I'm talking about societies where perhaps 60 to 90% of homes have access to the internet, and 2, where children from a very early age are using the internet, game consoles, etc., where in some countries in Europe we have between 20 to 30 hours a week of exposure from a very early age. Now, what is this telling us? This is telling us, number one, that there is a change in the mindset of our generations now in our primary schools and in our middle schools. This mindset is heavily influenced by the logic, the intelligence, the navigation procedures of the new technologies. I think in your own lives, I don't know if you have young people in your homes, do you ask them for help with your DVD player or your mobile phone or so on? If you do, then you'll know what I'm talking about with generation shift. What is so crucial about this is that more and more of the young people in some of these societies have great difficulty learning now for use later, learning now for the exam next week. They want to learn as they use and use as they learn. And this is having a profound impact on the teaching of all subjects, including, especially, English language. The second issue relates to the brain. Now, I've had some wonderful meals here in Korea since I've been here, and these do look a little bit like pictures of rice puddings or some sort of rice cakes, but they are not. They are pictures of the brain. And I don't want to go into the details of this research, but I would like to ask you to imagine that the first language is Korean, in the yellow, and the second language is, in green, is English, is a second language learned as a language. What we are seeing is this: 1 + 1 equals more than 2. Now, I shouldn't really make jokes about mathematics in Korea, which is the leading advanced society in the world in teaching mathematics, but what I mean is we are beginning to see that some knowledge, and I stress some knowledge, in using a second language has an added value in terms of thinking skills. Now, people have assumed this for many, many years. They used to teach Latin in certain countries for many years, not so that you could go out and speak Latin with your neighbor, but in order to discipline the mind. And this is where English is very, very exciting. Number two, if a child, like a Finnish child or a Korean child, learns English, it is so far apart in terms of language families that we're very interested in the thinking leap between English, for example, and Korean. Whereas as I speak English and French, the leap is actually possibly a lot narrower. Finally, by Christmas of this year, by the end of this year, we have in Europe a big effort to search at the evidence that language learning has an added value. And what I want to show you is these slides, because these don't prove anything. In fact, there is no definitive evidence about learning English or learning language. But take a look at these. On the left-hand side, you have the mind of a child who has learned English from a young age. On the right-hand side, you have the mind of a young person who learned English from about 15 years onwards. In the center, you have the mind of a child who learned English from about 10 to 15. You can see that the location of the languages in the brain is different. Early language learning is actually having a physiological difference in terms of placement in the brain. What does it mean? Well, actually, I don't think we know. Does it make you more intelligent? We don't know. Does it make you happier? We don't know. Does it make you richer? We don't know. What we do know is that learning a language like English as a second language has a direct impact on neurocircuitry, and I estimate within 5 years we are going to know what the story is about. The next issue is about methodologies. The 20th century was the time of the individual. It was the time of the lonely rider. It was the time of fission, whereas the 21st century is very much the time of teamwork, and it's the time of fusion. If you look at high-performing countries in the OECD PISA, you will find Korea top in mathematics for certain reasons, but you'll also find countries like Finland, which are heavily using constructivist methodologies. Yes, there is competition in the classroom, but the competition is team against team. It's not individual against individual. Learning by construction, not learning by instruction, is a mantra which goes back at least 150 years in the educational sciences and is absolutely right bang on the table now. Because this is a complicated world, the knowledge society. Children must process their thinking with other children in the classroom much more than just listening to an adult speak. Every child a scientist. Vygotsky is an absolute truism. Now, if, for example, you buy a new laptop, do you learn the technical principles of Linux or XP? No, of course you don't. What you want to do is you want to learn how to use it immediately. Never has that been truer of how we should be teaching and learning English language in the public sector. Another interesting development in the knowledge society is how our political and administrative structures work. One of the things that I think is very, very true is that we need to have a breakthrough between the interface of teaching, for example, the English language professionals in schools, and the policymakers, those who are responsible for making key decisions. And sometimes in countries, there is what we call disjuncture. There is a breakdown in the system. There is systemic failure because the examinations, for example, measure qualities of learning which is not what society needs. And quite often there is this problem in some countries. I am new to Korea, I'm not in a position to comment here. What is intelligence, they used to ask in the 1960s. What is intelligence? Answer, it is what intelligence tests measure. If we want to empower the children in the public sector towards English, we have to make sure there are no social or systemic blockages which are actually influencing how parents want their children to learn English, how they want them to perform, and so on. And the answer, which has been found, not by the European Union actually, but by the Council of Europe, which is much more than Europe, is alternative assessment systems called formative assessment systems, and these have been a major key in improving the quality of learning English in these societies. If you have a washback, a negative washback effect, because all the parents worry about is will their child get through the exam. If you have exams that are what has been called based on the tyranny of accuracy, there are countries, ladies and gentlemen, who are failing to equip their children with sufficient English skills, simply because they are teaching their children more about English grammar than the 60 million people who live in the United Kingdom. That is absurd in an age when we need English for communication. And now we're coming towards the end. An integrated world needs integrated curricula. We can see advanced societies quickly now changing their curricula, especially for primary education, because they realize that actually the child of today, who is the young person of tomorrow and the adult of tomorrow, doesn't actually need to know as many things as before, but does need to be able to do, but does need to be able to be multitasked. Mathematics and English have come out and been identified as very, very bad to be taught as subjects alone, to be taught in a vacuum. Both of these subjects are very, very interesting. Now, some would argue that mathematics is a language, just as English is a language. Another key issue is that if children have emotional blockages towards learning maths or learning English from possibly a very young age, where perhaps they felt embarrassed, they were laughed at in class when they were trying to say rice, etc., those blockages can remain for a long time. Have you ever wondered why it is that certain young people who are very smart and very gifted just cannot learn maths or just cannot learn English? From educational psychology, we're getting these interesting things, which is why when we learn maths and English, the environments need to be as low stress as possible. We need to learn in relevant, we need to learn in authentic ways, and there is no reason why the public sector can't provide that. When I look at the teachers in the public sector of English, I see a very advanced profession, but I often see a profession where they are not able to fulfill what they could do because they are constrained by the system. So my argument now to lay on the table is that often we need systemic change. That does not mean major change in how English is taught. It means making sure that the professionals can give the children the kinds of communication skills they need, and that the exam systems don't turn the parents or the society to force the professionals to do something different. So to summarize, we need what is called a competence leap in English language in certain countries, very, very fast. In the 21st century, English can drive social equality, social equity, and socio-economic prosperity. And that's why English should not be left in the hands of a private sector. That is actually quite a damaging that can have quite damaging inroads into social structure, because we need English in the hands of more young people than ever before. Change needs to be systemic. English teaching needs to start early. English teaching needs to be embedded in the curriculum. Remember, maths and English. Maths is embedded in the curriculum. Children need maths in geography, in physics, in chemistry, etc., when they go to buy their Sony PlayStation or their Korean PlayStation, if you know what I mean. But English is often not. It's like a fragile flower that is not given the oxygen and the light with which to develop. And we do have evidence of public systems where a major turnaround has been made very, very fast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Marsh, for the excellent presentation about the competence building for globalization. Dr. Marsh presented us 7 key drivers which need consideration and how young people can effectively prepare themselves for the global collaboration. Among 7 key drivers, we also recognize that the English teaching needs to start early, and the young people need to feel ownership of English as a key to global communication, and English teaching need to be embedded into curriculum. Thank you again. And our next speaker is Mr. Mark Howard. Mark Howard, Director of English Language Service at British Council Korea. Mr. Howard has worked for the British Council for 14 years in various countries. He is responsible for supervising English education and programs offered by British Council, and also closely working with the Korean Ministry of Education on projects in English teacher development and training. The title of the presentation is Role of the Public Sector in Establishing Global Communication Skills. Please welcome Mr. Howard.
안녕하십니까. Good morning. Thank you for coming to the session today. I realized we're pushed for time, so I'm going to press on as we've got about 15 to 20 minutes. My title's changed slightly, as you can see. It's some key factors for success in national English language programs. And this builds on from a symposium that we had a couple of weeks ago here in Korea with a number of key speakers, including somebody called David Graddle, who you may have seen in the newspapers. So I'd like to build really on what we talked about in that symposium. I'd like to start with a couple of quotations which I hope set the context of education generally and then English more specifically. I'd like to quickly focus on some of the challenges, because clearly there are a number of challenges facing us here. And then I'd like to move on to some of the success factors in broad terms, using examples from around the world. The first quote comes from somebody called Michael Byram, who talks about moving from language education to intercultural citizenship. I'll leave you just to read that quote rather than talk over it. It strikes me those three factors are very strong here in Korea. The first factor I hope is relevant as we're talking at an HR forum, and that is very much about the human capital required in a country's economy, and I know that's something that the current administration is very much focused on. I think the other two, I hope you recognise that's very much factors that we see in public education here in Korea, as in many countries. So there's really a context for the wider public education system and some of the factors which motivate and push that. This next quote is from David Graddle, and this is much more about focusing on English. I really like that last sentence, no pressure on those of us working in English language provision then. There is scope for great success, that's fantastic, but there's also scope for great disaster. I hope what we're showing here is some ways that we can ensure that there's success rather than disaster. Very quickly, some of the commonalities that I've seen working around the region, looking at an Asian context in terms of English language education. Clearly within East Asia, there's quite a spectrum from Singapore and Malaysia at one end, in a very much an English as a second language environment, to countries like Korea, Taiwan and Japan on the other end, where we're very much in an English as a foreign language spectrum. However, I think it's fair to say there are a number of commonalities which we can see in an Asian context. There's clearly a gap between teacher supply and demand. That manifests itself very much in the debate between native speakers against training local teachers. There's clearly a need to upgrade the teaching language proficiency and their teaching competency. Those are two areas. There's their subject knowledge, their linguistic level, and there's their pedagogical, methodological level. There's very often a mismatch between the textbooks and actually what's happening in students' lives. And that's something we talked about at the conference. A lot of English is learned outside of the classroom, and we have to reflect that inside the classroom as well. There's a push to introduce English much earlier at primary level, and there are studies around whether that's a positive thing, whether that's not a positive thing. I think one of the issues which we see is that when it is introduced, it's not introduced with the right training and resources in many countries, and that's something that we need to address in the region. Many countries are also promoting a student-centered interactive approach, but again, in the classroom, those approaches are only seen in a partial way. The big issue in this region is accounting for diversity while at the same time providing equal access. And I know that's a very strong and controversial issue here in Korea, and getting that balance right. And the last one I've put, and this is not just Korea, this is very much about the Asian context, is what I've called examination fever, which David touched upon. It's really very much exams are central, and people take lots of exams, and I saw in the paper today further debate on that. Those are the constraints. Moving on to what some of the key factors for success may be. Being patient. One of the first expressions I learned in Korea was pali pali. Maybe Korea has wonderful, great qualities and characteristics, but maybe patience is something we're going to have to work on. I think it's fair to say, as David Graddle points out, language curriculum change is a long-term project. I mean, that's a very simplistic thing to say, but it won't happen overnight. The reform may happen, but the impact may not. He talks about, and turn away at this point, but he talks about a vision lasting 30 to 40 years, yeah? And he uses examples like Finland, where David is, or Singapore. Now, that's not saying we've got to wait 30 or 40 years. Things can happen next year, things can happen in 5 years, but to get real real change, we're probably talking about 30 to 40 years. And one of the main factors in that is that's how long it will take for children at school today to become teachers. That's not saying that people have to wait 30 years to improve their English. In a way, that's quite controversial, I think, to get people to think, whoa, that looks a long time, but it's not tomorrow. I think that's really the issue there. Clearly, we can do things tomorrow. We can make a difference tomorrow, but if we're looking at it as a systemic project, it's a long-term project. I was possibly a bit unfair here. It says most governments are in search of rapid results. I would say that's most people are in search of rapid results. Parents are in search of rapid results. Teachers are in search of rapid results. Students are. And the government really has to reflect that. I think there's nothing, that's logical. A government has a 5-year span. But again, I think we have to bear that in mind when we're looking at policies. Gradle says language education requires a commitment and consistency which is unusual in other policy areas. So we can't have one government doing one thing and then switching to another. There needs to be consensus, as there has been in the countries like Singapore, like Finland, like the Netherlands, where real success has happened. The next one is to provide sufficient resources. The first one here is enough time is provided in the timetable. Again, Byram uses a really good example comparing Norway and Japan. Now, we all know Norwegians are fantastic language learners, and maybe for Japanese people it's more of a struggle. That's the kind of perception that we have there. Norwegian successful, Japanese less successful. But if you actually look at the amount of hours that a Norwegian school child gets on foreign language over their school life, they get around 1,000 hours, which would take them to around C2 on the Common European Framework, a proficiency level. In Japan, they have 315. So no wonder Japanese students, that's clearly one major factor why Japanese students don't do as well. It's an obvious point, but we have to look at that. Sufficient time is provided in the timetable. Teachers are key, as David said. We have to ensure there's sufficient teacher development. Professor Butler in Japan did a study of Korean teachers that showed that around 91% felt that their self-assessed level wasn't as high as their desired level should be, linguistic level. We've also got pedagogical and methodological issues. Much money needs to go on teacher development. And again, school-based models of continuing professional development have been seen to be much more effective. If you learn while you're on the job, and you'll know this as HR people, that's much more effective than just going on a course outside of your context and then going back to your office. It's really important that as well as pre-service training, we have school-based models of continuing professional development. So what Gradle talks about is the importance of time, intensity, and quality. David Marsh talked about convergence. This is one where we need to be joined up in our thinking. That means that the exams, which everybody is so keen on, fit in with the curriculum. If we don't test speaking in the exam, then that's going to have an impact on what's taught in the classrooms. If we focus on listening and speaking, if we focus on those skills, then they will be taught in the class. And so there's issues there, and this has been shown to be the case in many countries around the world. Singapore have an excellent program around ensuring that all stakeholders are involved in policy decisions, and that includes employers, so in a conference like this, as well as parents. Now that may be high risk here in Korea, but in the end we need to get a consensus and a convergence in many countries. Singapore is a very good example, but again they've spent 30 to 40 years on that, and we must remember where they are and that there's a slightly different context. And again, it's not just about the Ministry of Education. We need to ensure the commitment of other key ministries. It's a national project. It's not just an educational one. It strikes me that English in Korea is a social issue, it's a political issue, it's an economic issue, as well as an educational issue. If we're going to spend money, we need to focus it. So again, in many countries, they move away from trying to do what's called a big bang national approach, where we try and change everything in one step. That's very difficult to actually achieve. We need to start work in areas where other ingredients for success are in place. We need pilot schemes. We need to try things out. We need to see what works. Now, again, there are issues around that, but in order, experience shows that the big bang national approach is very difficult to implement. And again, back to patience. If you try and go too fast, then that can cause problems. We need to allow new approaches to grow organically. We need to be clear about why we're investing all this money in English. And I think we need to remember that, the development of English is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. Sometimes people trying to get their TOEIC scores or their IELTS scores, that's their focus. But it's actually about when do they use English? When in Korea what do we need to train people up to do? When do they have to actually use English? Is it just to show their social status, or is it actually to be used in the workplace or to be used? So we need to think very clearly, as they have in places like Singapore and Malaysia, that English is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And again, I probably shouldn't say this as an English expert, but we shouldn't focus only on English. English nowadays, and certainly in the future, will not give young people a competitive advantage. It will be a given. Everybody, to some extent, will have English. People need Mandarin. They need Japanese. They need Spanish. They need Portuguese. If you speak 2, 3, 4 languages, then you've got a competitive advantage. If you speak just English, then you haven't. So I think we need to factor that in. It's not only about English. This one as well, develop local expertise. Again, this looks like I'm trying to do myself out of a job, but I feel very strongly that we shouldn't rely only on expertise from outside, and this has been shown around the world. It's about building expertise within the country, which is the most important. Yes, it's important to learn from experience in other countries, but it's not a good idea to copy. It's a much better idea to look, learn the lessons, and implement it in a way which will be relevant for the country in which we're in this case, Korea. We need to allow teachers freedom and responsibility. We need to give them a framework, we need to train them, we need to treat them well, and we need to trust them. And if we do that, we'll get good results. And again, the learners. David talked about much learning is done outside of the classroom. Learners are interacting with English outside of what goes on. So we need to try and encourage learner autonomy. This is what happens again in countries like Singapore and Finland, and a focus on critical thinking skills as well as just on cramming and trying to learn. They need to take responsibility for their own language learning, and they do. And we need to trust them in that. Not easy. It's about a culture change. Social equity, we've talked about briefly. It's true, English tends to magnify inequality in societies. There are those that are good at English and there are those that are not. There are those in urban areas that get more access. There are those in rural areas that don't. That's the case. However, Gradle argues that actually if you try and provide equality of provision across the board, you actually create greater inequality of access to English, because you actually need different approaches for different kinds of learners and different kinds of schools. Now that's quite a radical suggestion which Gradle talks about, but he is saying, yes, social equity is important, as we saw in the first slide, but the way to achieve that from looking around the world is not necessarily by offering exactly the same to everybody. And that actually can promote more inequality. I'm trying to find a quote from Gradle at the moment. To quote Gradle, he says, "The need to cater for diverse combinations of levels, ages, and needs may be an enduring feature of postmodern education." That may be where we're going in many societies. So there's the summary. Be patient, be generous, be joined up, be focused, be clear, be local, and be fair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mark Howard, for that informative presentation about some key factors for success in national English language programs. And now the third speaker is Dr. Chang-Yong Yang, Professor of English Education at Jeju National University. Dr. Yang is actively involved in various academic organization as a member of the editorial board of Modern English Education Society, Affairs General of the Korean Association of Linguistics, and the co-president of KOTESOL Jeju chapter. His insightful notion and professional views about the need of well-organized English education program in Korea with a model example of Jeju Free International City will be spoken during his presentation. Please extend warm welcome to Dr. Yang.
Thank you, Chairman. As you can see, the title of my presentation, I'd like to focus on Jeju, the inside of Korea, especially the JSSP. This is stand for Jeju Special Self-Governing Province. I'd like to talk about a little bit different story from the first two speakers. Then my talking is generally the focus on some policy has been done so far in Jeju Islands. I'm not talking about the whole general idea issues about the language planning and language policy in general. Then I'd like to start with some general ideas and why. First of all, I'd like to start with some backgrounds. Why is Jeju? Why is Jeju at the center of national attention in the English educations? Then I'll move on to some policy and some education thing has been done so far. Geographically speaking, Jeju lies the south of the Korean Peninsula because of its unique formation through volcanic eruption. Jeju has such natural beauties which many people are fascinated. Because of its natural beauties, Jeju Island was recognized by UNESCO as a World Natural Heritage in 2007, last year. Because of all these natural aspects, Jeju enjoys a unique status in our nation, and it is a tourist destination domestically also, receiving a huge amount of Japanese and Chinese tourists. Because of Jeju's geographical location, Jeju is a bit internationally oriented city. Then I move on to the special stage. Well, this is general information about the Jeju, population and location, something like that. Then I'm talking about the new administration system in Jeju. First, why English education is really important. Why emphasizing Jeju? To understand this situation, first I have to talk about two new administration systems, so-called Jeju Free International City and Jeju Special Self-Governing. First of all, I talk about the birth of JFIC, stand for Jeju Free International City. Actually, it was first introduced in 1998 and confirmed 2001, then formally established in 2002. Then it has designed to, for example, to attract a global company and minimize regulation in economic activities in order to enhance the quality of life. And the other one is you can read on the screen. Then recently, Korean central government has delegated considerable parts of its administrative power, except for diplomacy and national defense affairs, to Jeju provincial governments to devote itself to utilization of domestic and foreign capitals. Jeju Special Self-Governing Province emphasized the autonomous power of local governments. Then designated as a self-governing province, Jeju has been a heart of national attention, going through dramatic changes in several areas, including language policy. Gaining the autonomous power of administration, local governments of Jeju put their efforts into making Jeju globally recognized city. As a first step for this, the first priority goes into the improvements of communicative ability in English. By reflecting on language policies implemented in Jeju, the present talk will further explore how current policy help its people enhance foreign language communicative skills and shed some light on future language policies and how to implement them. Strictly speaking, Jeju has never had a language policy consciously planned. It has had language policies ad hoc responses to immediate needs or political pressures, often contradictory and inadequate to cope with changing times. Jeju needs language policy that reflects our current values and social needs. Then from now on, I'll talk a little bit about the status of the Jeju. Jeju in English, in Jeju, in reality, the first foreign language in status. And legally, Jeju's special law stipulates that the main foreign language to be used shall be English. Other languages may be used when considered necessary. From this statement, it is clear English has a special status in Jeju from a legal point of view. Here's articles and talk about the English use in Jeju. Then, based on these backgrounds, we can assume that the three basic goals of communications. First one, to understand foreign cultures and to sharpen international sensitivity. Second, raise the basic ability of communication in English. Third, the foster an international perspective by intensifying foreign language educations. As in many other parts of Asia, the spread of English has been propelled by a number of related economic and socio-political factors. Mark just mentioned this kind of factors. The same is true of Jeju, in which socio-political matters play an important role in improving communicative skill in English. Then I move on to the main things, what happened in English education, local level, educational, and national levels here. First, I'd like to focus on the local level in three parts. The emphasis of English through the change of law, the establishment of Human Resources Development Institute, and the announcement of action plans. First of all, let's talk about the Jeju local foreign language policy, focusing on the English language. There is an impressive change in self-governing law with relation to the use of English. The adoption of foreign language policy in its law is to emphasize the use of English in various areas, including school and government offices. This is a big jump from previous status of English in Korea. It can be understood this new law produced an auspicious climate for English in Jeju. Then what is the significance of this law? The significance is that the principle guiding language policy in Jeju has been made explicit. Second one is the Human Resource Development Institute. In this institute, focus on three parts. I'm talking more focused on the foreign language policies here. Here, foreign language education is equal to English education. English education consists of two parts: education for citizens and education for civil servants. English program to improve basic communicative skill is designed for citizens for short duration. On the other hand, the intensive English program is designed for civil servants for an year. For this intensive program, about 25 civil servants are selected around Jeju and study English only for improvement of English communicative skills. Although this program leaves much to be desired, in terms of contents and qualified teachers, it can be said some progress has been made towards human resource development, which is at the budding stage. Then this year, the local governments of education. Local governments, special self-governing province have a special action. It can be divided into 3 stages. The first stage is called take-off stage for the use of English. The main goal of this first stage is to make a better English-friendly environment for communication. For example, the specific plan includes building an English education center. The second stage is for spread of English through extensive English education. The plan includes the writing of official documents in English. The final stage is for widespread use of English in Jeju. By 2020, Jeju will try to make extensive efforts to invite foreign investments into the community of Jeju without any communicative barriers. English will be the main medium of all business transactions. Okay. Then I move on to next, the educational levels. The educational levels, also 3 main things are pointed out here. The first one, English-friendly education environment. Second one is changes in English program. Third, human resource development through teachers training. Then first I talk about the English-friendly environments. To make English-friendly environments in Jeju, the first thing local Ministry of Education did is to set up the English facilities around the island of Jeju. So far, 4 new English education centers has been built in which many native English teachers try to help students improve their communicative skill after school or in school, in part of the school programs. Another thing is that local Ministry of Education also supporting the introduction of a new facility, such as an English library and English classroom. One English library supported by the special self-governing province was built this year. Then I move on to the change in programs. Change in English program can be summarized into first one is expansion of English education, starting from 1st grade rather than 3rd grade, and introduction of I Love Schools. This is English specialized schools. Here I briefly talk about what is I Love School here. In 2006, Jeju local governments of education developed a special school of education called I Love School. Here, I stands for various meanings, such as interesting, imaginative, international, innovation, and so forth. The phonetically, I used to refer to the children in Korean. Taken together, this school is designed towards children's English communicative skills, raising their global senses. Other than regular school, I Love School has some power to arrange its curriculum, including more extended English class hours, an introduction of many native English teachers, and self-made text for communications. You can see on the screen there are many several parts for the I Love School programs. After school, Saturday programs, and extra curriculum, something like that. Then, third part is our teacher trainings. Teacher training has directly related to human resources development in that investment in teacher training has a ripple effect. Recognizing this kind of close relation, the local Ministry of Education has developed new teacher training courses. One is run through summer or winter break of months, mainly focusing on the basic communicative skills. The other more intense program has been just started this year, which train teachers for 5 months in country with 1 month abroad program. Then finally, I talk about the national level of English policy in Jeju. Then why Jeju? Well, first of the first one is the need for global communication through English. Second, increasing number of students who go abroad to learn English. Finally, English centers to maximize English education. Actually, this is emphasized by the central governments to establish English education city in Jeju. Then what will going on in English city here? This place will definitely be a city in which English language is a medium of communication. More specifically, it is an education city with schools and everyday living environments together. The educational facilities of cities are English medium schools, comprehensive and in-service teacher training centers, and cultural awareness centers. All of this mainly focus on improvement of communicative proficiency. This is I only talk about the education programs, other than the central government planning more than these programs in English education city here. Then I'd like to make some suggestions for the consideration for human developed resources. The first one, I'd like to talk about the contents and curriculums. If the local Ministry of Education has a real desire to improve communicative ability through English, to strengthening human resources for English communicative skills, there should be well-designed curriculum for English education. Contents and standards should be provided for what all students should know and be able to through each school level. It should also be addressed how to improve English classes, how to upgrade the teaching ability of English teachers, and how to strengthen the motivation for English learnings. The second one is foreign language centers. There has been a lot of small talk going around with relation to improvements of communicative skills. However, it is necessary to set up a so-called foreign language institution which will take leadership over various language-related matters, including language policies and language educations. It is noted that to understand spreads of language and policies that promotes international dominance of certain languages, many nations run some language-specific institutions, such as British Council, the Alliance Française, the Spanish Royal Academy in relation to language policy and promotion. For human resources developments for English communication, this kind of facility is a must in Korea. The third one is qualified experts. A qualified expert is including the qualified teachers. If there is a real desire behind the rhetoric of improving standard of English and intensifying economic and social development efforts, the main focus should be on producing a group language experts. These experts need to include language planners and qualified teachers. The final one, enhancing cultural awareness through cultural exchange programs. Communication is not just a conveyance of thoughts or ideas. To promote better international understanding of other cultures, it will be necessary that people in Jeju have a chance to experience other cultural aspects of language learning. When teaching people in Jeju English communication, the goal should not be have them acquire the same values or linguistic customs as the native speakers have. Rather, to foster an awareness of mutual differences in these respects, opportunities should be provided for the people in Jeju to deepen their understanding of global cultures. Finally, I hope Jeju tomorrow will be the people communication and places. here I put the communication in the middle of the screen. The reason is that communication is meant to connect people and place. In Jeju, also in Koreanizing. Well, I just focus on what's going on in English education and in Jeju from local governmental efforts and educational efforts and also the national efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yang, for the instructive presentation about the perspectives on Jeju City's policy and the practice in strengthening English communication in Jeju Island. Then today we invite two panels, Professor Lee Byung-min of Seoul National University and Professor Kim Seon-woong of University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. At first, I will introduce you briefly. The first panelist, Dr. Byung-min Lee, Professor of Department of English Language Education, Seoul National University. He is currently a member of National Committee of English Curriculum Development at the Ministry of Education. In addition, Professor Lee published numerous books as well as journals, articles on English education. His research interest field are in the world English language policy, the second language acquisition, and the second language literacy development. Professor Lee, you will have 10 minutes more or less, yeah, can be. So please welcome Professor Lee.
Thank you very much. Well, today we are going to talk about foreign language education, or in terms of global competitiveness. I think that within this 1.5 hours, we can cover all different topics of English education worldwide. So I think that we have to a little bit more focus on the current situation, primarily English education here in Korea, because I think that if we can come up with some kind of a solution to Korean in terms of like how to develop English education, then I think that it throws a lot of implications to different countries who are right now struggling to develop their English language programs. So first of all, actually the three presenters discussed a lot of topics, but I think that the scope of the topics are so widespread, so we can talk about all the topics, but some of the suggestions, for example, like David Marsh proposed, is that maybe his approach or his understanding of the current English language education seems to be reflect the Western, as I said, Western view of approach to learning and language education. Even though actually I studied in the United States for extended period of time, and then I'm interested in language acquisition and learning and teaching and learning. But since I just came back to Korea, and I have tried to implement such a Western style of language teaching or learning, or even basic style of language learning and teaching to our students. But what I found out is that it's not easy to change our students in terms of how they actually approach to the language learning. So I think that we need to develop our own way of teaching or learning language, because we have our own specialized, more locally contextualized way of learning or thinking, so that even if we emphasize that we are living in a globalized society, but I think that convergence and globalization is very important, but in some way, actually, we have our own way of living in Korean Peninsula. which is quite different from the rest of the countries. So I think that we need to have both perspective in terms of like local aspects of our culture and society, and also global aspect of culture and society. So, for example, like if you, to solve all the problems that we have in terms of language education, also more wide like education that we have, for example, even if he mentioned that the PISA score, which is the OECD kind of testing of their adolescent students, we are in the top of the 25 countries in terms of score. Only score we are top. And compared to Finland, I think that we share only 1 point in terms of the students' performance. But the rest of the practices that we are having in Korea is totally different from Finland. He introduced Finland case several times, but in terms of teaching, in terms of students' motivation, in terms of learning, in terms of the way the teachers approach to students, in terms of the way students' approach to learning is totally different. So I think that if we can introduce all those approaches and mind and thinking and culture, I think that we can solve all the educational problems just overnight, he mentioned. But David Howard also mentioned that we need to have patience, because learning is not simply kind of manufacturing. Okay? If we want to change our educational system or language education system, I think that first of all we have to change our society, and we have to change our teachers, we have to change our students, and we have to change our minds. So if I suggest one solution that I'm thinking about, is that like simple. Today we are talking about the role of public sectors, okay? How we can implement, how can we introduce more better system into our education. We are talking about public sectors, not talking about private sectors, okay? So in terms of public sectors, as long as we continue to have this kind of evaluation system, for example, like when the students enter their high school, okay, I think that the current government is more emphasizing such a type of competitiveness, but I think a little bit have a reservation on their policy. But when they enter the university, okay, as long as we have such type of evaluation and admission policy, and even in the primary level and secondary level, as long as we evaluate our students' language performance based on such current system, I don't think that we can implement such type of more communicative, meaningful method. I'll give you one example. For example, yesterday I interviewed some of my graduate applicants. One student taught at one local foreign language high schools, okay? Foreign language high schools. And they are very excellent in foreign language skills, English, German, Russian, Spanish, and so on. But once they enter the high school, the entire focus move on to mathematics. Why? Because without getting high score in mathematics, they can enter the good universities. Okay? So foreign language high schools' main focus is not foreign language. Their main focus is mathematics. That's the reality that we have. Okay? And also, a couple of days ago, I listened to some government policy or discussion in the United States. One of the main educational policies the Bush administration has implemented is No Child Left Behind. And I don't know whether they might think that that's very successful, but if you will listen to local teachers, I listened to some of the interviews, and they say the interviewers are the teachers of the year in a particular state. Okay? They say, I don't want to teach anymore because of the No Child Left Behind policy. Because of the system of evaluation, okay, teachers don't have any autonomy. Teachers don't want to have any creativity. teachers don't have any motivation to create in a more different way to teach their students. So think about our educational system, evaluation system, and that we have right now. Okay? All the written exam in the classroom, and when they move up to high school and college, always we have to multiple choice written exam. I think that we can ask teachers to develop your own way of teaching, which is quite different from the exam. I think that American case, which is No Child Left Behind, throw a lot of implication to our case because we don't have any experimentation in terms of why we have such type of educational problems that we have. Always we are emphasizing creativity and students' autonomy and willingness to learn a subject, but they don't have. Their only focus, even in the Seoul National University students, my goal, actually this is my personal comment, but when I went to the university, Seoul National University, my goal is to teach bright, excellent students, whom I have very high motivation, but for the last 7 years of my experience, I don't feel that I can find any strong, motivated students who are really interested in learning, not passing the getting grade or passing the bar exam or something like that. So that's the real problems that we have not only in English education but general learning here in our society. So I think that maybe there are some ways, personally I believe that there should be some ways, as long as we have problems, I believe that there is a solution. So if we really look at what the problem is in English language education, but also in general learning, I think that we can come up with some kind of solution. So we have to find problems, exactly what the problem is. I don't think that to search the problem, we need to have more integrative views, and we need to develop some kind of convergence and consensus from many different sectors. I don't think that English education is not the job of only my job. Here, actually, his major is economics. So and people from many different sectors should be come together to come up with one solution. And also, I point one last point is that, for example, in the United States, teachers are always saying that they are moving at the table kind of movement. Do you know at the table movement is that local teachers are always excluded from their decision-making processes. So teachers are asking that I want to be at the table when they make some kind of policy decisions or decision-making. So I think that we need that. So we need to listen to local teachers. We need to listen to the principals. We need to listen to the parents. We need to listen to corporations, businesses. And then I think that we can come up with some kind of better solution, and then we can implement that solution, as he mentioned, for next 30 years or 40 years, then I can see some kind of change that in our society. That's my comment that I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Lee, Dr. Marsh, and Mr. Howard. If you have any question or ideas concerned with the presented topic, please share them with us, but after listening the comment of last panelist, Professor Sunung Kim. Okay, now let me introduce you the second panelist, Dr. Sunung Kim, Professor of Economics, University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. Dr. Kim joined the University of Wisconsin in 1989, where he presently serves as Professor of Economics. He is also involved in publishing at 3 different journals. He is co-editor of the International Economic Journal, Associate Editor of the Division of Labor and Transaction Costs, and Associate Editor of the Journal of Korean Economic Studies. He published numerous papers and books himself, both in Korean and English. Please welcome Dr. Son.
Good morning, everyone. I'm an economist. Unlike this distinguished panel of speakers, I have very little systematic knowledge on the teaching English. But I learned English, I use English, I teach in English. So I suppose that the organizer wanted to see or hear a layman's perspective. But I feel like that I'm the, in the Korean expression, that the 번데기 앞에서 주름 잡는 것 같아. But laymen can be brave, right? So I'll make a comment of the brave comments. Foreign language opens up the opportunities. There's no question about it. I mean, if you know only one language, then your ability to communicate, read books, seek on business opportunity, and so on and so forth, are limited to those people who speak in that language. If you know foreign languages, it expands the opportunities. Particularly English, which is used as a more of a universal language these days in business, science, culture. If you include like Michael Jackson and Britney Spears as culture, it certainly expands the opportunities. But I see the Korean case, it is difficult to put this a coherent framework of putting the English instruction in the public school. Why is that? Well, myself, I learned English from the 7th grade to the 12th grade, and then 1 year in college. And then when I was preparing to go to the university to study graduate school, I studied 4 years in Hagwon, okay? And I learned, how are you? I'm fine. And you? I feel stupid. You know, when you're 20 years old and then you have to recitate these kind of things, you feel really stupid. But I felt that was necessary because the only thing that I learned at that point was very large, prejudice and Pride and Prejudice, and those kind of very literary things. Then I learned Japanese for 2 years in college. And when I learned Japanese for 2 years, I was as good in Japanese in English at that point. Japanese was much easier to learn to Koreans. Then I learned Chinese when I was a faculty at the Bryn Mawr College. I learned 2 years of Chinese. I was getting better, but the Chinese was not as easy as Japanese to me. In other words, Korea located right between this Japan and Korea, Japan and China, two major East Asian countries. We have schizophrenia, okay? Which language we should learn? Chinese? There are, the 1.5 billion people there. Japanese? All the mangas are from Japan. All the rice cookers are from Japan. Mitsubishi cars, Toyota cars, they're from Japan. So, shall we learn Japanese? Or English, which is far, far, far away. It takes me 14 years to get here to attend the conference. Far, far away. So which language shall we learn or shall we teach? Well, in the case of the public education, I think that the Minister Byron of, is that Scotland or England? The three objectives of the public school system: increase the human capital, to increase to promote this national identity, and third, provide some sort of a social equality. But in those three things, English teaching in Korea fails miserably, I think. Again, laymen are brave, okay? The first one, in terms of the efficiency, I'm an economist, so you always look for the efficiency. Efficiency means how much money you put in, how much output you get out. English teaching, we spend lots of money. Public money, private money, teachers' education. In fact, I have a student who went to the grad school and then couldn't finish a PhD in economics. He came to the one provincial town, Gwangju, and I was asking him, What are you doing? I mean, you stop in the middle of getting a PhD. I felt you're kind of doing a miserable life. No, I'm doing great. What are you doing? Well, I'm running this English teaching institute, 학원, English teaching for 5 to 7-year-old kid, and I'm making better money than you. If the students, which are 5 years old, 7 years old, spending $500 a month in learning English, and after that, how much they accomplish. It is very expensive the venture that we are doing it. A second, it's about this equal access. Equal access. I mean, it was mentioned that the English actually may promote social inequality because the people who have an access to be able to learn English are higher social status than the lower ones. Okay? So, in the case of Korea, because of the private tutoring, you spend a lot of money in private tutoring, the inequality in the teaching English has been exaggerated and promoted by this private tutoring. Why is that? Why is that? The fundamental reason is public education. Provision of public instruction of English is a systemic failure. It's a systemic failure. What do you mean by systemic failure? The system fails as a whole. Therefore, it is very difficult to fix it in a small, minor changes. If your car is broken, okay, you bring your car and they try to fix your engine, try to fix your transmission or whatever. But English instruction system is a systemic failure. You don't know how to fix it. It is totally damaged. Why? Well, I see many of these so-called the 조기 유학생 in my town, and they come in as the 5th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. You know, first year they are really uptight. You know, they don't want to go to school and it's too scary. You know, teachers asking you a question, I don't know what to do, and so on and so forth. But 1 year or two, they are totally transformed. They are confident. They become leaders, and so on and so forth. So I figured that what's going on? There is a fundamental cultural shift that's happening to these students. Being able to call your teacher, you, how are you? Rather than, it's a very different cultural perspective. In other words, that being able to initiate your own thinking and your own learning, your own communication matters a lot. So here are the things that I think one should consider for the Korean education system. Early intervention and the English immersion, like Jeju Island. I think it's an excellent idea. You should start language earlier because when you start the language later, you know, it is difficult. When you learn language earlier, the pronunciation and the connections and all those come back to you when you don't use the language during the process. So that's first one. Second one is that you need to have the more learner orientation, not teacher's orientation. The instructions and testing methods and all pedagogy and so on and so forth are totally driven top-down. 9th curriculum? Come on, what is 7th curriculum? What the students want, what teachers want, and what Professor Leo is mentioning, the localized decision at the table. In other words, what the students want. The Marcus has spoken loudly, very, very loudly. You need to listen to this, which means the younger people are packing their bags, go to Australia, even Philippines, to study English. Something terribly is going wrong in this country. The third point is that give choices to the educational consumers. Well, if you call that way, that a lot of educational people, aren't you a neoliberalist? Yes, I'm liberalist, not neo. You have to put me Leo. Neo, I am a liberalist. Put this more people, more power, more resources to those people whose life depends on it. Teachers' life doesn't depend on how well they teach English, but students' life depend on how well they learn English. So they should be able to make better decisions than the teachers. Finally, the systemic innovation. I think this is a very difficult thing to do. I know that the Professor Jung was trying to make that happen in Jeju Island, but as I said, Korea is a multi-nodal, multilingual node. It is difficult to have a consensus. I mean, teaching English at the younger age, sometimes are very upset. We are losing our soul, Korean soul. It is only for the rich people. So we don't have a public consensus. Even in that consensus, how can you come up with a coherent curriculum and the coherent teaching method, coherent instructor training, and so on and so forth? So it's going to be really a difficult thing to do, but as the second speaker, Mark Howard says, be patient. It may take 40 years, 50 years. It's not going to happen in 2 years. But pali-pali, we're not going to get you anywhere. Because it's a systemic failure. One cannot fix a little bit and change it pali-pali. You need to design the whole thing, change the whole thing, implement it slowly, and learning during the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sonung Kim. Now, we have a very few minutes, few times, no? Even though, Dr. Marsh, if you have any idea, concern with the presented topic, please.
Thank you to the two respondents. I mean, I leave the audience to judge the merits of my presentation. I think we live in an interconnected world of diverse cultures, north, south, east, and west. And what binds us is science and scientific research and the urgent need for global dialogue. And I hope, and I think that has been brought out during the three presentations this morning. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Marsh. And Mr. Howard, please.
Yeah, thank you. If I could just finish, I suppose, on a positive note, because I'm one of life's optimists. I've worked in 7 or 8 different countries around the world in English, teacher training, working with various ministries around the world. And I can hand on heart say that Korea is the place where English is right at the top of the agenda. It's on the front page of the newspaper. People are passionate about it, as we've seen now. And I think we need to take that as a positive. I think that also has a flip side to it. There's enormous pressure, as we said, from David Graddles. I mean, there's possibilities for disaster in the way we implement things. I think I should finish by saying we've talked a bit about consensus. It's everybody's problem and it's everybody's solution. We've talked here about teachers, about policymakers, about foreigners, about local teachers. You know, easy to say, but that's really what we need in English language education here in Korea. It shouldn't be about blaming. There seems to me a lot of blame goes on in terms of it's his fault, it's her fault, it's their fault. It shouldn't be about blame. And I know that's very idealistic, and I said I'm an optimist. But you know, given what happened in the United States yesterday, optimism and change seems to be in the air. I feel very strongly that all of you here have an interest in this area. Out there, many people have an interest. It's not an academic or an educational area. It's a huge social, political, and economic area for Korea. So I'm optimistic as well. There are always solutions. It may take us a while to get there. I hope we can work together as a community on that, and that kind of convergence, I think, is going to be very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. And Professor Jung, if you have any comment.
Actually, I have not much comments. I try to censor the Mark's remarks a little bit. And we just made the Professor Lee and Professor Kim talked a lot about problems and kind of a little bit solution. But it's time to start talking about the problems of Korean English education. It's a really time to look forward, positive, directions in English education. If we have some problems, it's a really good starting point for the new directions, for the new, positive way of English education. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In conclusion, I agree personally that in language education, the earlier the better. We know the Korean government is planning to implement English education at primary school from the 1st grade from the year 2010, which currently is on to the 3rd grade. By starting to learn not just English but all the foreign languages in early age it will be facilitated for young generation to gain global knowledge and for the world to further closer collaboration. This is the Global HR Forum 2008 themes, which is fostering creative talent for global collaboration. It cannot be denied that Korea's rapid growth in global market has been promoted by cultivating well-equipped human resources. To educate young talent is to develop our world. Okay, then now is the time to close the session. Before, I would like to extend again my sincere appreciation to Dr. Marsh, Mr. Howard, Dr. Yang, Dr. Lee, and Dr. Kim for providing us with their most intriguing presentation and opinion for today's session. And I would like to thank everyone for your attendance and participation in the forum. Thank you so much.